Welcome to this episode of the Doug Sandquist Podcast. Where interested is interesting, and interesting people share their stories and build their biographies along the way. I'm your host, Doug Sandquist. I'm a dentist and a photographer, and now a podcaster. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Doug Sandquist is the tag, at one word, Doug Sandquist. And on Facebook, Doug Sandquist Photo is my Facebook photography page. You can also join our email list by going to DougSandquistPodcast.com. And today's guest is Stuart Kinkade. Hey, Stuart. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, it's my pleasure, Doug. Great to be on your podcast. And being somewhat old friends, it's good to connect in this type of a discussion.
Yeah.
So I look forward to your questions, and I know you want my answers honestly and truthfully. Well, you'll get it. Okay, cool.
And as with all of our guests, I don't have a bio in front of me, and I have not read Stuart's bio, but I will tell you that we met in an online photography mentor group called the Arcanum about 5 years ago now.
Yeah, about 5, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's true. And so we started sharing photography tips and tricks way back then. We both worked on our photography together. And then just this last year, he was on a trip. One of the things that was interesting about Stuart was when we were in the Arcanum, he was living in India at the time. So all of his photography was from the local town that he lived in, which was a stark difference than anything else that we had ever seen. And it was quite interesting for sure. And just this last May, I believe, he was on a trip into Las Vegas, where I live, right. We met up and went out and shot Red Rock one morning. So we actually got to meet in real life. So that was actually kind of a cool deal. Yeah. And so now we're kind of coming full circle, and now we're doing an interview on the podcast. So the goal of today's show is to figure out Stuart's real biography. You okay with that, Stuart?
Sure, no problem.
And as with all of our podcasts, we start off with 10 starter questions, quick and easy ones. You ready?
Hit it.
All right. And obviously there's no maybes here. So just yes, no, or pick one. So gummy bears or M&Ms?
M&Ms.
All right. Sweet or salty?
Salty.
Hot or cold?
Hot.
I guess living in India and Southeast Asia will tell you
hot could be spicy, I guess, but
yeah,
okay, hot.
Yeah. Would you wear flip-flops to Disney World?
Yes, I would.
You would? Okay. All right. Are you an early riser or a night owl?
Early riser.
Cow or chicken?
Cow.
Short hair or long hair?
Long hair.
Tattoos, yay or nay?
Yes.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Cake or pie?
Pie.
And the bonus question is sauerkraut. Love it or hate it?
I've learned to love it.
All right.
I was
cool
for an answer.
Yeah, I like that. Was there a time when you didn't like it at all?
Oh, it was terrible as a kid. But then I think it's an acquired taste like many things are. I was definitely not a vegetable kid, but I've acquired taste for vegetables now. So,
all right.
Ever changing.
So where were you born?
Well, I was born in Fort Dodge, Iowa, back in the 50s. So I've been on the baby boomer side.
Okay. So what is your earliest childhood memory?
Well, I can remember Christmas seems to be my earliest childhood memory. I didn't have, my dad had a dog, and I remember under the tree and playing with toys and playing with my dad. So never so often I look back at those old Polaroid pictures back then, and I'll see those memories reflected again. But that's probably my earliest. I have no clue my age.
Right. So what were your summers like as a kid?
Well, I mean, I grew up, we moved from Fort Dodge, Iowa to a town outside of Chicago called Lisle back in 1956. And that's where I went to school and grew up there. But I can remember it was a free-for-all. I mean, I told Mom I was going, and I came back at 4 or 5 o'clock, and that was it. We'd ride our bike to Naperville. We'd ride it to Downers Grove. We just did everything as a kind of like a pack of kids with no fear. And I don't think you could do that today, but we just kind of took off on our own. We didn't have a cell phone. We didn't call up to say where we were. We didn't have GPS. We just
What kind of stuff would you do on your bikes out as a pack of kids? What would you do on those summer days?
Well, mostly it was just a long cycling trip, and we rode on the side of the road, and we went to the nearest forest preserve, and then did some trail biking.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, back then it wasn't an XM bike or anything. That was just a normal Schwinn bike.
Yeah. You build forts or anything like that?
Pardon?
Did you build forts in the woods and stuff like that, or just kind of mess around?
Yeah, we did do that, and I think the biggest fort we ever built was in the winter. We did a lot of ice igloos.
Oh wow!
We dig into the snow banks there, and then you'd cake the inside of the snow bank with ice and harden that up, and then maybe you put a little bit on top, and we kind of hung out there. That was one of our winter events to build.
Wow! Did you ever ice skate in the winter?
Ice skate in forms of hockey, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So hockey was still. I didn't do figure skating, but I did.
Right. Ice hockey.
Everyone kind of played ice hockey. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. I grew up in Las Vegas. That's a foreign idea to me. So that's.
Well,
kind of
yeah,
cool.
a bit of a challenge.
So what was your first job?
Well, how far back do you want to go? Actually, my first job was I was still young in high school in my freshman year, and I remember my mom got this job for me in the summer. I picked up rocks, boulders on a potential golf course that they were doing. So, 200 kids are sitting there picking up rocks all day, and I don't know, making $1.50 an hour, and things were pretty good.
Yeah.
But eventually, I went on to the next best job, and where I've learned a lot in life. That was a caddy. So at the local country club where I rode my bike to, we had a caddy house. It was just like Caddy Shack. We played cards. We got paid in cash. We just hung out, and then we go out and carry doubles maybe, and we got maybe $10 a bag and a little tip, and again all cash. So as a kid, it was pretty good. I think it was the regular Caddy Shack in many ways.
How many years did you do that?
Well, we did it for about 3 summers, and then we got too old, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the other benefit was we got free golf on Monday, so that was my chance to get some personal golf lessons and challenges.
To be able to play, right?
Yeah. So nice course in Hinsdale.
Okay. That's cool. My aunt went to nursing school in Hinsdale.
Oh.
That's a connection.
Another connection. How about that?
Yeah. And then my dad grew up in Rockford, so not too far from there.
Well, I've got friends in Rockford, and I remember Rockford was one of my corporate companies that I worked at, a company called Sunstrand.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. So was growing up, was going to college, like did your parents like encourage you to go to college, or was that like a thing that, was it encouraged?
Oh, highly encouraged. My dad was in ROTC and University of Iowa, also out of Chicago High School. And so in December 41, he got kind of called up, and he had 6 months left in university. And he never ended up going back. Obviously, it was in the Army for a while and came back out. And I think from that experience, he highly encouraged me to go to university. And back then, I think it was somewhat expected that you would.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it worked was that he would pay for everything, and then my job was to pay it back for my sons. So I did that for one of the sons that decided to go to university. I paid his way.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's expected to do it for his son.
Mm-hmm.
So like pay forward.
Yeah. So how did you pick your career path in college? What was it? What was your what was your career path? What did you get your degree in?
Well, my degree's in mathematics. I started out in chemical engineering, and I can remember taking the last slide rule course in university because they switched to HP calculators.
Uh-huh.
And then I was taking math on the side, which I always had an interest, and I was acing calculus left and right. I go, hey, I like this.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't think about what potential job you can get, but I took math, switched over to Math BS, and had a little dabbling of statistics, which would prove out to be beneficial down the road.
Mm-hmm.
But in the summer of 74, when it was time to graduate, by the way, the reason I graduated in the summer is the spring semester of 74, I was supposed to finalize, but I turns out the only math class I needed, I was the only one that signed up, so they canceled the course on me. So I had to stay an extra summer session to take a course with the professor on Euclidean geometry. So
I don't even know what Euclidean geometry is. So,
well, I can't recall it either personally, but Mr. Euclidean did a good job with it. So all of a sudden, there was an advertisement on the campus for a job, because I had done a student teaching in Marshalltown, Iowa, and so I decided to take this opportunity. They wanted teachers back in Australia. So in '74, myself and hundreds of U.S. teachers, fresh out of college or a little bit of experience, headed to Australia, in Sydney and all over New South Wales, and we were teaching high school kids. And that was the best experience of my life, really, for 2 years. I was making a whopping $6,300 a year.
Wow!
No tax, because they wouldn't tax me in Australian because there was reciprocity with the U.S. So that was my first dabbling, not only in teaching, but more importantly, in travel.
So that was your first trip out of the country? Or to live out of the country?
Oh, yeah. That was my first trip. I remember riding on the Qantas. They flew us over, and back then you could actually go into the piano bar. They had a piano bar. You could go into 747, and you could walk in with the captain, and I sat there for half an hour, watched him fly the plane. So those days are gone.
In the air.
In the air. And it was very interesting just to see, because obviously on autopilot, but I didn't realize that planes basically are on the same line, but at different altitudes. So all of a sudden you'll be flying, you'll see a plane fly over and then a plane fly under in different directions, or opposite direction. So
wow, I didn't know that either. I didn't know that they flew right over the top of each other.
Yeah, so it's important you stay at your altitude. Well, that's what he told me.
So, and you were a college kid, right? So you're like, okay, I'll take it. So were you into photography back then in college?
Well, my dad bought me a camera as my parting gift for Australia, obviously a 35 film millimeter camera. Prior to that, I had borrowed his Polaroid cameras and consumed a lot of film. Back then you had the film would come out and you had to take that little squeegee and the sealant and seal off the picture. Mm-hmm. And I got an interest at that level. I took the 35 millimeter and Kodachrome back then, and had slides and I don't know where those pictures are at now. I didn't scan them back then. Yeah. But that was I took that camera everywhere. But really, I parked my interest in photography when I came back to the States and I got a job, and that statistics got me into quality. And that's the path I've been on for the last 44 years. So
yeah. So what was your first job after teaching? After you did your student teaching in Australia, where'd you come back to?
Well, I worked at a company, like I mentioned, Sunstrand in Ames, Iowa. Mm-hmm. And I started out general bench inspector, and then I moved to tool and gauge inspector, and then eventually up to the office area. So I had a good to learn manufacturing. You have to work on the floor. So that's why I enjoyed working on the floor. But I always use that experience because it's the same all over, from being able to associate with people on the shop floor. Mm-hmm. So it was a good experience. And eventually I moved on from Ames, Iowa to Minneapolis. And then from Minneapolis, I worked down to Asheville, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. Then from Asheville, I went to Culpeper, Virginia. And then I went back to Asheville. Then where did I go? And I went to Pinehurst, North Carolina. That was a little golf capital down there. Mm-hmm. Nothing else to do but golf. And then moved up to Elon College in North Carolina.
And this was all just working in manufacturing jobs, various factories around. Right. Yeah.
Different divisional directors and stuff like that. And up to Kalamazoo, Michigan, then over to Chittenango, Syracuse, New York. So I moved around a lot, and really it wasn't really till about my 2000, I have to say around 2002 that photography got my interest again with the digital camera when it first started to come out. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even think about 35 millimeter or any other film photography. I was just kind of busy doing my thing. Mm-hmm. So as I got into that digital, that kind of opened a whole new world to myself, as it did many, because you got that instant feedback.
Right.
And I think in many ways that's what turned me around and off of digital. So right now, I pretty much shoot 100% film. So I've gone back. I've gone back to the past.
Yeah.
And I'm 100% film right now.
So what has been the biggest difference going back to film? What has that allowed you to do?
Well, everyone mentions this, and it's very true that with film, you really do slow down when you only have 12 shots on your Hasselblad on 120 film, or if you only have one shot on your 4x5 film. Mm-hmm. That really slowed me down. So I'm pretty much large format and medium format, and I just bought a 35 millimeter, kind of as my, I'll call it this Olympus One, kind of like a point and shoot carry camera with me. But I think the slowing down is very true, and the appreciation when it comes back from development and scan, it's like a Christmas present, every day. You just amaze what you get. So that means you have to get it right, as they say in camera. So that's been a shift in my mentality and approaching photography. When I was with you, I was out there taking pictures with film, but I did have my digital Fuji,
right,
which was nice at the low light situations. But now my Fuji is actually my home's in Xi'an, China, and then all my digital gear is back in China, along with my film development gear. So I'm using the local labs here to get my film developed.
Yeah. So how did you end up in Southeast Asia? What was that? How was that? What happened with that journey?
Well, when I was with a company called Eaton back in the 2005 timeframe, I was asked to go to China.
Is that company that makes the golf carts? No.
No. No, they do hydraulics. They do a lot of different type of activities.
Okay.
And they asked me to go over to China and support back and forth a startup JV. So that was my first interest. So I ended up later in 2008 getting a full-time job in China through a friend of mine that was in HR at a company called TRW, which eventually became ZF. So I was in Shanghai from 2008 to 2014. And then the company asked me to go to India, in Chennai, India. I was on the board of directors for the company, a resident director, and that was more of a total business type of job. Loved it at Chennai, and again, the people and the whole environment was just lovely. I've always said
that's when I met that your photos were from Chennai. That's what I remember.
Right, from Chennai. Now, I did go up to Varanasi 3 times. Varanasi is the photographer's paradise, and you'll see that every so often on YouTube videos and stuff. And it's very true. If you had one place to go in India, Varanasi would be the place for photography. Okay.
Yep.
So after that, I tried to retire. I thought I retired, but then the company asked me to go to the UK in Birmingham for 2 years. So I went to Birmingham. I loved the UK for landscape. And I mean, I really started to watch a lot of the YouTubers out of UK. And there at that point, in India, I had a Fuji GF 670 camera that was a kind of a Texas Leica. It was a collapsible camera. And that was my first medium format. And as I got to the UK, I got a Mamiya 645, which is very good starter camera for medium format. And at that point, eventually I did sell it because I shifted to Hasselblad. But so I started to do maybe 50% photography with film in the UK. Developing it was expensive. I mean, it was like 25 pounds for development and scan. And in time, after 3 years, I thought I was going to retire again. And then I got asked to go to Vietnam, and that's where I am right now with an automotive OEM called VinFast. I'm in charge of supplier quality for the company, having a great time. And right now,
Are they trying to make cars? Is that what they're trying to do in Vietnam?
Yeah, they're actually we were making and selling cars. We launched and built a factory off the seafloor in 21 months to get to the first car off the line. So
wow.
That was pretty much a world record. Now we bought some technology from BMW, and there's quite a story about VinFast. But it's been a real learning event because they've changed all the paradigms that you would normally think of in automotive relative to timing, and they made fast even faster now.
Wow, that's
so
impressive.
Now I'm in Haiphong, Vietnam, right now, and luckily I can get my film developed either 4x5 or 120 or 35 in Hanoi for right around $2 to $3 USD per roll, including a high-res TIFF scan. So for that cost of, say, call it $3 USD, how can I even do it myself at that cost?
You can't.
But you can't. So, and that would never fly, that kind of cost in the U.S. But I know eventually I'll have to get back into development, but it's not until I fully retire, because it's very hard to carry all the chemicals from one country to the other when you, in fact, you can't ship it, you can't take it with you.
Mm-hmm.
Even the powder's a little tough.
Yeah, so your home is technically in Xi'an, China, right? That's your home base. And you haven't been there in a few months, I'm sure, because of all of the quarantine going on.
We
right?
left November right now.
Okay.
But I'll be out your way again and in Albuquerque and Seattle, hopefully in August, September, October of this year. You know, I think things are going to open up, but the consumers and the travelers are going to be very hesitant to be the first in line, I'm sure.
Right. So is Vietnam shut down right now?
Vietnam primarily has the COVID-19 in Hanoi and Da Nang. Da Nang's a tourist location kind of on the center of Vietnam. Haiphong, where I'm at, has had 0 cases of COVID, and they do a very good job of separating what they call the cities and the districts. So right now, you're not allowed to go from city to city or from district to district unless you have a special permission with a red stamp on the piece of paper, which I do if I need to go to work. Right now, I'm off of work for at least 2 weeks, and I go in maybe once every 3 days or so because we still have activity.
So I know you mentioned that you built your factory in 21 months. Is Vietnam seeing a lot of industrial manufacturing development? Even
for sure.
Beyond,
for sure.
like that's leaving China. Is it all moving to further Southeast Asia now? I mean,
that's happening. I know there's Chinese companies coming to Vietnam because, like with every industrial country, there reaches a point where the price and cost of a product would be at a level of potential outsourcing. So China is starting to outsource here. Vietnam itself is a very good market. It's growing. And once the infrastructure is in place, just like China did back in the mid-2000s, that infrastructure drives a lot of growth. Mm-hmm. And I think Vietnam is another growth engine for Asia Pacific. The population is much less. I want to say 20 million in Vietnam. So the population is not big, but they're starting to build the middle class, and that's where the consumerism really kicks in. So you get that middle class up, you get the infrastructure. I think you'll find Vietnam 5 to 10 years from now very popular. Today, it's very popular for tourism, but as you can imagine, that is fallen off the cliff right now.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, nobody's traveling anywhere, right?
No. So,
how's the photography in Vietnam?
Well, it reminds me a little bit of a combination of China and India. You get a lot of colors like you do in India, and you get some similar, I'll call it temples and buildings like China. And the people from all 3 countries are very, very friendly. So right now my photography has been primarily out in the countryside. Now in Haiphong, they've got these big limestone mountains that you see. The famous location is Halong Bay. Halong Bay is just about a half an hour north from here, and I'm able to get some nice pictures there. So I've been focusing primarily pictures outside of the city, except when I get up early, like I'm an early riser, I've been going out to the city and doing the neon light pictures. So a lot of my pictures of late have been like at 5:30, catching the lights. And that's been interesting. I mean, in Vegas, you'd have all kinds of opportunities for different lights here and there. In fact, overkill.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking to see them all. I mean, the lights are still on, but all the casinos are closed right now. It's something. It's interesting. I would have never
paying for the lights.
Yeah.
And
so how much longer do you think you'll be in Vietnam?
Well, always a good question to ask. I'll never say never, but there's a chance I may stay into next year and finish up the job that I want to get done for the company. So if that's the case, I do want to come back to the U.S. on a frequent basis. And one of the places I think I've mentioned to you is Las Vegas as kind of a hangout, or like a home, and or Albuquerque. Both cities have an interest for me, and I've always liked the Southwest, because back in the old days, when we took our 62 Oldsmobile from Chicago around Route 66 down to Phoenix to see my grandparents, they moved down there in 58. We just fell in love with the Southwest. I can remember going to the petrified forest, and back then they had no cages on the stone. And my dad was a rock hound, so we always collected rocks. I mean, geodes and stuff. And we'd be coming home from those trips. We sit in the back seat, and on the back seat floor, there'd be tons of rocks. So our knees would be in our face on the way home. So we were just full of rocks, and he created quite a collection. He always wanted to get into his retirement for rocks. And okay, and we almost moved out there. In fact, the Carlsbad, the Pikes Peak story. I can tell you that one.
Okay.
Back in the 50s, Pikes Peak obviously was a place to go. And the problem was, with the cars, the old 56 Olds we had, they could not make it to the top because they would overheat. So you would go like halfway, and then you'd pay a taxi to take you all the way up to the top of Pikes Peak. Now comes 1966, an Oldsmobile, Tornado Oldsmobile, gets launched. It has front-wheel drive. Its advertisement is, I can make it all the way to the top of Pikes Peak. Sure enough, it comes up. What happens? My dad buys that car, and we head straight to Pikes Peak.
Wow.
So I think so.
He bought the story hook, line, and sinker, huh?
Oh, and we got to the top. That was the best part. So he was real proud of that. But that was the first front-wheel drive really car vehicle in the U.S. There's a few other ones. There's Eagle was a front-wheel drive too. But the Southwest has always had an appeal for me. I like the dry. I know when I was in Vegas and saw you, I mean, it might have been hot, but just being so dry was fine. I loved it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Cool. It sounds like, I mean, but you'll always you'll stay in China for a little bit, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Back and forth, depends on what the situation is. And I think just going back to photography, that's what this is a little bit about. Yep. I think. Sure. I've chosen, when I had a big house and 5 acreage, and here 5 acres and all the work to do, mow 3 acres, I always kept busy doing projects around the house. Well, my house now is downsized to basically a 170 square meter apartment. So really there's not much to do. Therefore, photography kind of became my project. Mm-hmm. So I've immersed myself for the last 5 years in photography. And one of the things I found very helpful was YouTube. Mm-hmm. Now, you take everything with a grain of salt, but there was the teachings. I remember starting with Mike Brown helped me out a lot. Ted Forbes helped me out a lot in some of the early stuff. Mm-hmm. And so over time, I still subscribe to their channels, but now I'm subscribing more to film photographers. Mm-hmm. And now I'm going more into large format. I'm starting to subscribe to large format channels, and I can see the resurgence in film. And besides, and I see it a lot in large format with the manufacturers coming up.
Really? Yeah. You're seeing 8x10 start to come up? I guess I haven't looked into the film world.
4x5.
4x5, okay.
Okay, so there's Intrepid out of UK that does the 4x5 camera at a very reasonable price. They do 8x10. Chroma is doing 4x5. There's obviously used cameras. And I was thinking for yourself, being out in the desert guy, that maybe a 4x5 large format might be a good fit for you. That'd be a good challenge. And again, it slows down. It's just a real peaceful type of non-rush event. Sure, you may only walk away with 6 images exposed, but hopefully those 6 are spot on. They're all keepers, right? But large format, the downside of large format, talk about standardized work. If you go off your standardized workflow, you will get yourself in trouble. And I think I've made every mistake and ruined every image that you can. And I see everyone else still do it. After some of these guys have been doing it for a long time. A simple example is in large format, you've got your front lens on your front standard, and then you got the film plane on your rear standard. But you have to focus through ground glass. So to look through the lens, you have a switch, or you could have a shutter cable that opens the lens up to max aperture. So I opened the lens to 5.6, got my focus, good, everything's great, set my aperture, set my shutter speed, put in the film, pull out the dark slide, take the exposure. I forgot to shut the lens. So not shutting that lens after you get focus, things like that create a lot of issue. And you take it for granted in digital today, or iPhone, you take it for granted, obviously. So that kind of that technical learning combined with a little bit of artistic expression is always nice. Remember, we went through that learning in the Arcanum that talked about how you come into the core circles. You start out with the technical stuff. You get all happy about that, and then you get into your style. Eventually, you get to the center where you get that artistic flavor. And I think that's kind of where you are, Doug. I think you obviously got the technical side down, and your photos are really becoming artistic in nature. And I've been somewhat lucky to have my wife at least approve of 2 pictures I've taken to hang on the living room wall. So if I can get a picture hung on the wall, then I've
succeeded.
My mission. Yes, for sure.
So do you think your statistics background and your math background leads you to the technical aspect of going back to film? Do you think that's something that intrigues you or keeps you interested because you actually have to do the math on the fly?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. Now, obviously, there's apps for everything. So there's a good app for doing bellows extension and reciprocity. So if you're more than 1 second on film, you got it based on the film type. You have to go more than 1 second. So 1 second, maybe 3 seconds. So yeah, there's math there. So the technical side gets my interest. And I've always been a technical guy with math and statistics. But I did have a flourishing moment back in junior high when I won an art contest. So I had a little hidden artist there that comes out every so often.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how you've just stumbled back into the. I love the fact that you've gone back to film, and it's piqued your interest for you, which I think that's really amazing. Actually, I commend you because I really have no patience. I don't think I could have the patience to just shoot 6 images.
Well,
and I totally get it.
That's your 2020 challenge, my friend. Take it on. You know, I've got another camera coming. I got to be quiet so my wife doesn't hear me. But, you know, if cameras come in that are black, they can be hidden on the shelf and you would never know.
Right.
But I've got a 3D printed 4x5 camera coming. It's from a guy, Ethan Moses, camera dactyl out of Albuquerque. And I had to buy a separate lens, and then based on the lens millimeters, he creates a cone. You put the lens on the front cone, and then you use a calibration on a helical coil to set infinity in your different distances. Now, so what I'll eventually have is like a point and shoot 4x5 camera, and I chose a 90 millimeter, and I got some of the parts from eBay Japan's my best. I'm their best customer. Jesus. But,
so then you'll just build it yourself when it comes.
No, in this case, he's going to build it for me. I just have to assemble the lens. But now he's got another camera that's a panoramic camera, that Branco pan, that is a 3D printed one that you do yourself. And I'm on a couple of analog chat groups. It's just amazing. I'll say the younger generation, less than 60, seem to do a lot of 3D printing out there. So you buy the files from him. Eventually, he's going to release those to the world free. And then you go ahead and do your printing and assembly, sanding, fine tuning. He gives you a bill of material, and you put yourself a camera together.
Wow. I had no idea. That's pretty cool.
And then there's another guy called Chroma who does a 3D printed camera, 4x5, and a 4x field camera with adjustability. Plus, he's got a 4x5 fixed camera, I'll say, like a handheld, again, like a point and shoot camera, call it. Mm-hmm. So lots of activity in the analog world. It's kind of like for many people, it's kind of like an underground thing, I guess. You don't get a lot of press on it, but it's happening and flourishing.
Do you think we'll have like build your own digital cameras? Will they just throw a digital sensor in there and throw the logic board in there? Or do you think that'll not happen? Probably too many parts.
Well, I think there could be a digital. I don't think we're going to build lenses, and I don't think anyone's building lenses, but you could do the body. When you think of a camera, it's just basically a lens, a black box, and some kind of film sensor or film plane, right? Mm-hmm. So the black box is what a lot of people are building, and then you put your digital on that. The other underground activity that I've been looking at, being a bit older than most, I've got a bit of an analog past, and besides LPs, if you know what LP stands for, I know you do, right? Long playing album.
Yeah, right.
Now it used to be CDs, and now it's downloads and MP3, MP4s. But typewriters. If you ever watch a movie called California Typewriter, look it up. It's really a good movie. But typewriter seems to be another analog underground activity that's going on, and it's
really. I did not know that either. I didn't know that people were bringing back the typewriter.
Yeah,
like the Selectric.
Oh no! Well, yeah, that the IBM Selectric, or just the old Royal typewriters or Smith Corona typewriters, and they're out there. They're very cheap, and it's that tactile analog feeling that you get when you compose a letter, like I did in the old days. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky enough. My mother made me take typing in summer school and high school, and that was the best thing that happened to me because it's been beneficial now for keyboarding, for work, and everything. But I've been looking at that, and here's an example. I'm at home right now. I have no printer with me, but if I wanted to type a letter and send off on a Word document, I have to go downstairs, have them print, and give it to me. But I would love to just be able to sit here and type on a typewriter, capture my thoughts, send a letter to you, and post it in the mail. When's the last time you got a letter in the mail, even handwritten? It doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
Am I trying to retain a bit of the past? Yeah, I suppose so.
Maybe. Yeah.
Is that bad? I don't know. I love change. I embrace technology. I'm always the first guy to buy a gadget. But there's certain things that, especially on the tactile feel, and that's what you get with large format and medium format because you're doing the manual adjustments. Mm-hmm. You get that same thing with the typewriter. So I was just amazed when I realized how much underground activity there is, because even the 3D printing is a bit of a tactile feel. Mm-hmm. You have to lots of work.
You have to finish. I mean, the 3D print. I mean, people think that when you print something out, the 3D print, it comes out perfectly, and it comes out as a pretty rough resin. That if you're going to make it into something, it takes quite a bit of finishing down to make them look as you want them to look.
tolerances.
paint them.
You can only hold certain tolerances, and then if you want to print slower to get more lines per inch or something like that, then you got to. It takes long. I mean, it takes hours to print these machines.
Yeah,
So.
and the I mean, what's it's like 50 microns, I think, is like that's about as fine as they can actually print to, I think.
50 microns, isn't it? That's still pretty tight, But
yeah, but I'm a dentist, so remember 50 microns that's
will they ever print 3D teeth? You watch.
Oh no, we're already doing it.
Really? For implants? I'm gonna switch this interview around on you now.
Yeah.
Let me give you 10 questions.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, it's coming. I mean, it's definitely coming. It's just material science. We can actually print it. It's just material. It's just getting the material science up to board. That's all.
Yeah. So there's lots of good changes coming, but I remember I grew up in Lisle, Illinois, there just outside Chicago. Right next door was a dentist. He had his practice at his home. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I had appreciation for his work, and his wife was his assistant. It worked out well, and my job was I mowed their yard for $2.50 every week.
Wow,
so that was big money.
Yeah, it was.
I can remember when I went to Australia, he told me that it was like these fatherly words of advice from my dentist, saying, "Wherever you go, be sure that when they clean your teeth, that they always hand scale you. Just don't go in for that laser, ultrasonic that blows it off."
Yeah.
I've always kind of kept that in mind, and sure enough, I think the good dentists do hand scaling.
Yeah.
Still, now that's a final move, I guess.
Especially now with coronavirus. I mean, all the hygienists will probably do a lot more hand scaling now coming down the road, but we don't really know what's gonna come down the pipe. So you moved to China in 2008 to start manufacturing, just to help out. Was that 2008 or was it earlier than that?
2008. Well, I was in China in and out from 2005. But I got my first full-time job in China in 2008 in Shanghai.
So was that pretty much the ramp up of the big corporations starting to go crazy over there? Was in 2000?
Oh, for sure. When you think about it, 2008 was not a good year for the U.S. Mm-hmm. So I can remember being over there with my new company and on the management team, and I was trying to relate to them what happened in 1991, because automotive has always gone through cyclical recessions. It's almost predictable, but I think those days are gone. But as I was forewarning everyone that we could have problems, the opposite happened back then. China just took off and never looked back in 2008. The rest of the world was down. They kept going up. And so it was a non-issue. I hate to say it, but I didn't experience what you guys experienced in 2007, 8, and 9.
Yeah. So what's happening in China now? Are they?
Well, I think you heard the news. Wuhan they released all their people yesterday. So like many cases, as you come back and you're allowed to get out, not all the consumers come back to all the businesses for two reasons. One, not all the businesses are ready to open. Maybe they don't have all the help that they need because they're not around. Or the consumers aren't coming because they're still protecting and making their moves very slow now. So I think China will be the first to somewhat recover from the surge, if that's a word now going on around the world. And I think if we follow them, we'll get a feel for what happens as the U.S. comes out of their surge. But anywhere in the world, and probably my biggest concern for any country would be India, just the mass of people and the number of people you classify as poor, at high risk. If they get hit by a surge, it's going to be very difficult in India. But I think the people that live week by week, month by month on a paycheck are the ones that are being challenged right now. And I'm really glad in the U.S. that you've got some kind of financial assistance already coming and maybe more in the works. In other countries, they don't necessarily do that. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it's true.
That was another thing. You look back and your father gives you fatherly advice every so often. And when I remember, again, I went to Australia, my dad said, "You never change your citizenship. You always keep that passport." What? Mm-hmm. So
Yeah. So even though you've basically lived in China and Southeast Asia for 12 years now, you're still an American, right?
Yeah.
Pretty cool. So what would your current self say to your younger self?
Well, that would be a good question. See, well, I think I reach back and tell myself, I'd say I probably listen more to my dad. I can remember, you know how that goes. At 14, 15, your dad knows nothing, and by 21, 22, he's the smartest man in the world,
Mm-hmm.
as you understand. So I think I could have learned a bit more. I think the other thing that I wish I would have told myself is pay attention to my father's father, my grandfather. He was an IRS agent back in the 20s in Chicago, and he was an avid photographer.
Mm.
And I remember visiting his place in Chicago. He had a dark room. I didn't know what a dark room was. And he did all that. In fact, he took a plate picture of Lieutenant Patton. And Grandma kept that picture for a long time. And then they had a burglary, and apparently it was stolen.
Oh, wow.
So, and I all that time that I knew him while he was alive, he never really brought up photography. So I think I could have learned a lot from my grandfather had I listened to myself, or had someone given me the clue.
Right.
Because I think I would have learned large format and real photography much faster, because I've been eyeballing wet plate collodion as a potential. But
oh, wow.
That's another option, but I need some good training on that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was maybe get more an artist on your own. My grandmother, my grandfather's wife, also from Chicago, she went to the Art Institute back in the early teens and 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
And one of her jobs that she came out, she colorized photos.
Oh.
So again, another connection to colorizing photos or plates.
Huh.
And one time I asked her about Frank Lloyd Wright, and she almost went off the deep end. She just hated that guy.
Really?
Very arrogant, and I think she might have even known him or ran into him a couple
Mm-hmm.
times. But remember back then, he did an adultery thing. He left his wife and children and married his client's wife and headed to Europe for a year.
Oh, wow.
So he left.
That was
that
a big
was
scandal.
In Chicago.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was a big scandal. Now,
Yeah.
whether that's what her comment was, but
that's interesting. My grandfather was actually in the Art Institute of Chicago when the Depression hit. He actually had to leave school and move to Rockford and work in a tool and die factory as a precision grinder.
I bet he worked at the Sunstrand Tool and Die in Rockford. SUNDSTR.
You know what? It may have been. I'll have to look. I don't know. I don't remember. I'll have to ask my dad. I can't remember the name of the factory. Which factory?
Yeah, they were tool and die back then before they got into hydrostatic pumps and stuff like that.
Then my grandmother worked at Slick Electro in Rockford, which is they made the motors for in the airplanes.
Small world.
Yeah.
And my dad told me his favorite summer job, because he grew up in Chicago, was working at Wrigley's gum.
Yeah, the gum. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think I tell myself again, maybe pay a bit more attention to my parents and my grandparents relative to their experiences, and see if I could have leveraged that better, because I think I had a lot of missed opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you've developed them somewhere. I mean, I think I think in the end, Stuart, I think you've done an amazing job with your mathematical mind, figuring out how to embrace your art, and I think that's kind of what's inspiring. You know, I mean, not all of us have to do art the same way.
No, well, thank you. You know, one of the things I've realized listening to people like Blake Rudis and others that are trained artists that become photographers, they have their style is like color theory and all that stuff. They're really advanced on that whole thing. The rest of us coming from I'll call the technical side, trying to become an artist, that is a real challenge. And I think it comes when you stop talking about gear and start talking more about the process of taking a picture. And eventually that all becomes, when you do a composition, you don't probably even think about it anymore. You pretty much, walk up to the scene. That's what I want, and you take that picture from a composition standpoint.
Yeah, I think the discussion about gear is it bores me really. I mean, not that I mean I'm actually fascinated by the film discussion. I mean, I think it's fascinating to me, but it just doesn't really. It's not anything that I get too excited about. Whether how somebody takes an image doesn't really matter to me. If it's important to the user and how they capture their art, then that's their own. That's what you do, which is fantastic. But the idea that, a piece of gear or whatever made the image, I mean, the artist made the image, not the gear. It's just the tool. It's just a tool. And whatever gets you excited, but whatever gear gets you excited, use whatever you have.
Yeah, that's very true. And then you hear about I use Photoshop a lot and other softwares, and I do dark room type of adjustments, just like Ansel Adams did, from cropping to dodging and burning. So the idea of taking an image and trying to modify it to reflect your feeling and thought of what it looked like when you took it has been around for a long time. And some people would like to be purists. You see that every so often Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. But others, I think that's kind of what you've done. And that's what I'm trying to get to, is being able to take an image and then make the adjustments in Photoshop or Lightroom, or I use On1 or use Topaz or whatever, to come back with an image at the end that's what you envision. So obviously a little bit of Ansel Adams visualization, not only at the beginning, but at the end.
Right.
So I think I can see that in your images, and for some reason you're really into the Death Valley of late.
Yeah.
What's the deal there?
Well, it's 2 hours.
Sand dune.
It's 2 hours away from me, so it's an easy place to get to.
Well, you're going to have to take me there if I come visit. We'll have to make a run.
Yeah,
all right.
Sure. Yep, absolutely. Well, Stuart, I really enjoyed our chat. I mean, I think thanks for stopping by today and doing this with me. I mean, I think it's definitely interesting to see where you've gone in your art and how you've taken it and how your life experiences is taking you to different parts of the world. And, now there's not many people that would just get up and move to China and work for a manufacturer and then move to India and then move to the UK and then Vietnam. And who knows where else you'll end up now, because you're not going to retire in a year when you say you're going to retire, because you've retired 3 times already. So you're not going to do that. It's apparent.
You got me nailed. Thank you, Doug.
So I think and then you figured out how to carry your art with you, which I think is pretty cool. And I think that's kind of a cool story.
Just a concluding comment on what you just said. Living in a country and photographing the country is much different than being a tourist. Get off the bus and you got half an hour and then you're back on the bus. So that's one things that intrigues me, is when living in a country, in this case, whether it's UK, India, or Vietnam or China, the ability to go take photos as a resident is much different than someone who's just a tourist. So you got these guys on YouTube traveling all over the world. Everyone goes to Iceland, so you get all these Iceland shots. Now everyone's going over to this spot. So
yeah, I definitely think there's a value in hunkering down in a location and really capturing the essence of what that area is.
And repeat, see, Ben Horn always goes back to his same location every time. Do you do the same thing?
I do. I enjoy going back to other. I don't ever have a location that I feel like I've captured completely. I'll go back to the same location multiple times because it's never the same.
Well, maybe we'll have an opportunity to do that together.
Yeah.
By the way, I do have my Antarctica trip coming up in December with a bunch of photographers, and I'm almost at the point of canceling. I just don't know what it's going to be like to fly down in late November to go down to Argentina and all that.
Yeah, I just heard one of the ships down there, they had over half the passengers came down with COVID just like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, if you're on a ship and one mistake, you all get it. So
yeah,
I think COVID's going to be around. It's not going to end in the summer. It's going to be like I like to say, somewhat of a normal flu occurrence going forward. So
I think so.
The cure is important.
Yeah, I think
Well,
getting a treatment's important. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I've sucked up a lot of your time, Doug. Appreciate and I
No,
love the opportunity to talk to you, partner.
yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate for coming on my podcast, and I appreciate little words of wisdom and life experience. I think it's an interesting story. I appreciate it, Stuart. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you, Doug.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Later. Bye-bye.